guys, welcome back. My name is Nathan, and today I'm going to be ranking the #1 center for every NHL team from worst to best. Now, an absolutely huge shout out to Giraffe Neck Mark on the MLB side of things here on YouTube. He gave me this video idea, so if you haven't already, go check him out. But for today's video, how this video is going to work is that I have 32 different NHL centers, 2 for the Edmonton Oilers, but for the most part, 1 for every NHL team, and we're going to rank them from the worst to the best in the entire NHL. Now, the way I ordered the #1 centers was by average ice time. An example of this comes to the Vancouver Canucks, who would technically, their #1 center, be Bo Horvat. He played about a minute more than Elias Pettersson this year, so technically he would be the #1 center for him. So there are some centers that are probably top tier caliber that might just end up missing this list. So if you want to know where I put those players, let me know down in those comments down below. But which #1 centers do I think are the worst, the best, and everything in between? Watch till the end for all the rankings and all the picks, and of course hit that big red subscribe button for more videos just like this one. Now, starting out today's video with the worst #1 center in the entire NHL, I'm kind of beating a dead horse here, but it kind of has to happen. Going to my worst #1 center, I have Chris Tierney from the Ottawa Senators. Now, until they get Alexi Lafreniere, Quinton Byfield, doesn't seem like this situation is going to get a whole lot better. Chris Tierney this season got 37 points in 71 games. He's a fine player, I would say, and fine middle six player, maybe, but that's a player you do not want at your first line center, and especially with Jean-Gabriel Pageau traded at the trade deadline, this was the only choice. Now going on to the second worst #1 center in the NHL, I have Coyotes center Derek Stepan. Now, I was as surprised as you are that Stepan played the most minutes of any Coyote center, but he did. More than Stepan, more than Dvorak, which is surprising considering his performance. 28 points in 70 games. He got 35 last year and then 56 points the year before that. You know, that 2018 was not bad at all, but he's been heavily declining both in offense and defense, and right now I don't think has any business to be a #1 center on a playoff team at this point. Now moving on to technically the third worst 1C in the NHL, and going to the Anaheim Ducks, I have Adam Henrique. Now, it's unfortunate that I had to put him this low because I actually like Adam Henrique quite a bit, especially this season where he kind of rebounded quite well. Got 43 points in 71 games, got 42 the year before that, but this time got 71 games played in as opposed to 82, and got 26 goals as opposed to 18 in 2019. So overall, a much more complete year from him, but just overall, he's a guy that has more to give offensively, but is still on the decline, I would say. Is just average defensively and is an okay first line center. Next up, going to the next 1C, and this one coming from the Nashville Predators, that being Ryan Johansson. Now, I was kind of half expecting this to be Matt Duchene in terms of time on ice, but it was Johansson, and it just shows how many good other first line guys there are in this ranking video that Johansson is this far down. But to be honest, Johansson is a guy that I'm just not that big of a fan of, especially this season where he just, in the games I saw, did not have that big of an impact, at least what he should have had, because his contract is insanely expensive, and for a team like the Nashville Predators who want to win a Stanley Cup, he simply put needs to be better. Now going to the next #1 center, this one coming from the New Jersey Devils and the Swiss stud Nico Hischier. Now Nico Hischier, I expect to be rising up these rankings over the next couple of years, but so far he's been a pretty serviceable one center, a guy that isn't going to be your #1 center yet on a Stanley Cup team, but could potentially reach that. So far, at least this last season, got 36 points in 58 games. Unfortunately, has dealt with some injuries as well, and of course this shutdown season doesn't help either with his regular season stats, but that's a guy that just does not have that much to work with in New Jersey. Now going on to the next center and going to the Calgary Flames, that being Sean Monahan, and this one will surprise a lot of people, but I just don't think Sean Monahan is that good of a center. Obviously had a productive 2019 season, 82 points, but I think a lot of that was really the surgent play of Johnny Gaudreau and Matthew Tkachuk just being an absolute beast. This year really dropped off, same thing with Gaudreau, but I feel think him even more. And there's also a little bit of a stigma out there that he's this amazing elite defensive guy, and that just has never been the case in his career. From what I've seen in the analytics as well, it really does paint a picture that he's below average defensively. The offense in 2019 is nice, but the rest of it is kind of just okay. Now going on to the next number 1 center, coming from the Columbus Blue Jackets, that being Pierre-Luc Dubois. Now Pierre-Luc Dubois is a guy that I think has potential to become one of the better two-way centers in this league, and although he's not there yet, that's a player that is super important for the Columbus Blue Jackets. This year got 49 points in 70 games, the year before that got 61 in 82 games. Obviously not as good as when Panarin was there on that team, unfortunately, but that's a guy who's still 21 years of age, and over the 3-year sample size he has in his career, very solid offensive player so far, with, again, like Nico Hischier, the pedigree to become a very solid defensive player as well. Next up, going to the next number 1 center, this one coming from the Minnesota Wild, that being Eric Staal. Now, I was really surprised that I put Staal this low because I really do like him and his resurgence with the Wild, but I just don't think he is on that elite tier of centers, especially with his age kind of coming up. Now, in 2018, he saw his amazing year of Minnesota, 76 points and 42 goals. Overall, I think he's a very solid offensive centerman, more ideally as a number 2 guy, but for Minnesota, with Kevin Fiala, it's worked out pretty well so far. Now going on to the next number 1 centerman, and this one will be a surprise to a lot of people who just skipped to this part of the video, don't even hear my explanation, and write mean stuff in the comments. I know, it's absolutely sad, but if we're talking about a 3-year sample size, I think this is where he belongs. That being Chicago Blackhawks franchise centerman, Jonathan Toews. Now, Jonathan Toews, I will say, had a great 2019 year, got 81 points in 82 games, but I think Jonathan Toews, if we're talking about the overall play here, defensively he is not the same player he used to be. Both on eye test and analytics, he was a dominant player in the early 2010s in terms of pure amazing defensive ability, but he's kind of let off that gas pedal a little bit. Still pretty solid defensive player, but right now is just not what he used to be. Now going on to the next number 1 NHL center, this one coming from the San Jose Sharks, that being Logan Couture. Now, Couture, if I'm going to be honest here, is one of the weirdest NHL centermen out there because regular season Couture is pretty solid centerman, but playoff Couture is just on a whole different level, it seems. There is a difference between the two, I would say, but Couture overall is a very solid player. Even though the regular season this year was okay, 39 points in 52 games, and I got 70 points last year. He's a player that offensively has a lot to offer. Defensively, let's just forget that part, by the way, because it's not pretty. Now, keeping up the trend of weird centermen, going to the Vegas Golden Knights' main man, that being the Flow himself, William Karlsson. I hope you like that, by the way. I'm growing out the hair. I'm growing out the hair, man. I hope you respect it. Either way, William Karlsson is a weird center. Obviously, in 2018, had an insane year, 78 points and 43 goals. The next year, though, kind of dropped off a little bit, 56 points in 82 games. Still pretty solid, but obviously not the level he was. This year, though, saw more of a resurgence, 46 points in 63 games. Maybe not an ideal number 1, but a guy that Vegas can definitely work around. Next up, going to the LA Kings number 1 center, that being Anze Kopitar. And Anze Kopitar is another weird centerman over the past 3 years, because back in 2018, he had that almost heart-worthy season where he got 92 points in 82 games. But besides that, Kopitar just hasn't been up to that amazing level, but it's still been a very solid and probably number 1 worthy center. And I think if you just base it off reputation, Anze Kopitar has been a good defensive center, but over the past 3 seasons, kind of like Jonathan Toews, he has fell off a little bit in that respect. Still prioritizing the offense, which is perfectly fine, but the defense isn't up to snuff as it usually would be with him. Now going on to the number 1 center in the Vancouver Canucks system in terms of just pure ice time, Bo Horvat is the choice here, and he isn't higher, he isn't lower, which is the most vague statement I think I've ever said, but Bo Horvat is right here, which again is still pretty vague. Unfortunately with Bo Horvat, he's a guy that defensively I think also can go overrated. He played more time than Elias Pettersson this year, which I kind of think is just insanely weird, because Pettersson is a guy who actually, when it comes to advanced stats defensively, had a better year than Bo Horvat 100%. So when it comes comes to offense, he's still a very solid player, but the defense as well can go just a tad overrated. Next up, going to the Detroit Red Wings #1 center, and hey, I mean, Detroit's winning at least with this, I would say. That being Dylan Larkin, and again, they're not in the bottom 5, so we can host the parade at this point. But Dylan Larkin is a guy that I'm a pretty big fan of. Last year in 2019, got 73 points in 76 games, and then this year got 53 in 71. Not as good, but he plays for the Detroit Red Wings, so I'm not sure what we're expecting. Next up, going to the Montreal Canadiens #1 center. No, not Max Domi, but Phillip Danault. And Phillip Danault is a guy that's been rising up this list quite a bit. Played the most ice time with the Habs this season, but is quickly becoming one of the best two-way players in the entire league. Might not score Patrice Bergeron numbers, but is a guy that is very solid defensively, and I would not be surprised if he wins a Selke Trophy at some point. This year, got 47 points in 71 games. Again, isn't going to absolutely blow you away offensively, but can pitch in once in a while, and again, that defensive ability is actually very good. Next up for the #1 center is now going to my favorite team, the Dallas Stars, and Tyler Seguin. And Tyler Seguin is one of the most interesting players in the NHL for me, because in terms of pure talent, I think he's a guy that could be a top 10 center, but for me personally, I don't think is up there right now. In this season, he got 50 points in 69 nice games. The year before, he got 80 points in 82 games. But if we're just discarding the points for right now, Tyler Seguin was a guy that would just go weeks on end without really me even noticing him. He would get a lot of lucky breaks throughout this year, especially in the goal scoring department, and I thought overall just did not have as much of an offensive impact as guys like a Denis Gurianov throughout the year, or even a Rupe Hintz. Next up, going to the Washington Capitals #1 center in Nicholas Backstrom, and for some people this will be pretty low, but for me personally, when I'm watching Washington, that is an interesting mouthful. Backstrom is a guy that eye test-wise is pretty solid, but I don't think is quite as good as he used to be in his prime. And before all the people come in the comments saying, oh, Backstrom is underrated, I mean, he might be by me, but in terms of the general public, he has been one of the most cried upon, underrated players of the past 10 years. He is not underrated. If you keep saying he's underrated, he's not underrated. Next up, going to the New York Islanders #1 center in Matthew Barzal. And I feel bad for Matthew Barzal in a way, because sure, he's on a contending team in the Islanders, but his offensive muscles just don't get to go as much as they probably should. This year got 60 points in 68 games, the year before 62 in 82, and obviously had the 85-point season in 82 games back in 2018. But Barzal is a guy that I think if he was actually given a chance to be the offensive player he could be, would be a really solid player. Right now he's kind of like a Tyler Seguin, where he's in that defensive system, not getting as much points as he probably could be. Next up, going to the Winnipeg Jets #1 center in Mark Scheifele, and this is one that also I think is going to take a few people off guard, because some people might think he would be higher for me. But when it comes to Mark Scheifele, I think in pure offense, he is one of the better centers in the league. But in terms of defense, it kind of gets outweighed a little bit, as his defensive impact, let's just say for Winnipeg, is not all that great. But offensively, you see in 2019, 84 points. This year, 73 points in 71 games. Offensively, one of the best in the league, but overall, does get knocked down a peg for me. Now going on to the Carolina Hurricanes #1 center, that being Sebastian Aho. And Aho's kind of in the same situation as Scheifele, where offensively he is one of the best in the league, but defensively, let's just skip out on that fact. In 2019, he got 83 points in 82 games. This year, 66 points in 68. Aho, again, offensively, when he's flexing his offensive muscles, is super, super good. But if you're relying on him to pay defense, both work. It's not going to work out too well. Now, this next one is going to be one that is going to be questionable for some of you, but I need to set the record straight here. Next up, I have Alexander Barkov of the Florida Panthers, and some people out there have him as a top 5 center, and if we're just taking into account the last 3 years of sample size, I think he's a top 15 guy, around number 10, but I don't think is in that elite of elite company. If we're talking about Barkov here, especially in the past 3 years, he has taken a big hit defensively to produce more offensive stats. And again, that is perfectly fine. But the defense that you have been told that Barkov is playing is just not there. Last year, he got 96 points, incredible offensive season. But over the past 3 years, especially, that's a player that has sacrificed defense for offense. He has all the defensive tools in the world to be a Selke Trophy winner and actually deserve it, but that's a player that right now, as it stands, is more of an offensive player than an actual Selke Trophy winner. Oh, and also at the same time, Jonathan Huberdeau is better, so don't at me. Next up, going to the #1 center for the New York Rangers, that being my man, Mika Zibanejad. And over the past 3 seasons, Zibanejad has really cherished in some of his best careers in hockey. This past season got 74 points in 57 games and got 41 goals, man. Obviously, super high shooting percentage, and it's not likely to last. But Zibanejad is a guy that offensively really has flexed his muscles over the past couple of seasons, really being one of the more supreme playmakers and also having a fantastic shot on the side, which paired alongside Artemi Panarin has combined to be one of the best forward duos in the entire National Hockey League. Next up, going to one of my favorite players in the entire NHL, that being Tampa Bay Lightning #1 centerman, Brayden Point. Now, no, it's not Steven Stamkos. He actually played the 3rd amount of minutes by a centerman on Tampa. Anthony Cirelli was ahead of him, by the way, this year. But Brayden Point was #1 in minutes, and for very good reason. In 2019, he got 92 points in 79 games. This year, 64 points in 66. But Brayden Point is a guy that, besides the numbers, even if he was putting up like 40 points this year, I would still consider him one of the best because purely simply he is one of the best play drivers center-wise in the entire NHL, uses his speed so brilliantly for Tampa to just always be creating high-octane, high-attacking offense. Next up, going to #1 centerman for the Buffalo Sabres, that being Jack Eichel, and we're really starting to head into elite territory here. But even though he had an amazing year this year, we're still using the 3-year sample size, so we do have to pamper expectations a little bit. This year, obviously, got 78 points in 68 games. Fantastic player, MVP candidate for sure. The last year, 82 points in 77, and the year before that, 64 points in 67 games. Overall, just being a fantastic offensive player for Buffalo. And if we're talking about guys who are just pretty much on no man's land with really nothing to work with, Jack Eichel is one of those guys. So don't really be surprised if he ends up higher on these rankings, especially next year too. Next up, going to #1 center for the Philadelphia Flyers, that being Sean Couturier. Now, Sean Couturier is a fantastic two-way player, and he actually has the receipts, unlike a certain guy who has been underrated for years, Alexander Barkov. But Sean Couturier is a guy that, on top of his very great offensive impact, is, again, one of the best two-way centers in the league. This year got 59 points in 69 nice games, and for Philadelphia was once again such a big part of that team. Amazing shutdown center that can also score on the other end, and that is incredibly important. Easily a top 10 center for me in the NHL right now. Now, if we want to talk about just pure defense, next up, going to Ryan O'Reilly of the St. Louis Blues. Now, I'm talking about pure defense, but he can also score quite a few points. This year, got 61 points in 71 games. The year before that, got 77 points in 82. But Ryan O'Reilly is a guy that, in just pure defensive skill, coming from the Buffalo freaking Sabres, is one of the best shutdown centermen in the league. Last year was my Selke Trophy nominee, even though Mark Stone was making a pretty good bet for that. Ryan O'Reilly is one of my favorite players in the league, even if he's one of my least favorite teams in the St. Louis Blues. Now, I see we're just keeping the trend of two-way centermen going. Next up, going to the Boston Bruins and Patrice Bergeron. And Patrice Bergeron is a guy that, in just pure quality and class and everything you'd want in a gentlemanly-like player, Bergeron completes that. And Patrice Bergeron, I've been really surprised by really keeping up to that defensive mold, because you see guys like Jonathan Taves, who used to be an amazing defensive shutdown guy, now aren't quite the same. But Patrice Bergeron, on top of scoring some amazing point totals, is also still keeping up defensively and more than that. So, in all honesty, he's an absolute beast, even if I don't like the Bruins too much. Now going to a guy who's pretty much neck and neck, I would say, with Bergeron. You could go either way, and I would kind of agree with you. That being Toronto Maple Leafs #1 center, Auston Matthews. And Auston Matthews is a guy that, in terms of pure offense, is one of the best in the NHL. Not just with his shot, not just with his skating, but in pure terms of puck generation and shots and everything you'd want in just generating chances. Matthews is an absolute beast in that department. This year got 80 points, 47 goals in 70 games. It's an absolute shame that he didn't actually get to play those full 82 games, because he would have gotten to 50 goals, I would say, and would have set records for the Maple Leafs. But still, either way, that mustache and Matthews are absolutely magnificent. Now going to a debate that's kind of, I would say, unironically amazing. At the next spot, I have Edmonton Oilers first line center, who technically got more ice time than McDavid, that being Leon Draisaitl. And I will still include Connor McDavid in this list, don't get me wrong. Leon Draisaitl comes right above Matthews, and I know that will piss off and make a lot of people happy at the same time, so I don't know what to think. But I think the Matthews-Draisaitl debate is unironically freaking amazing, because both players are, I think, pretty close in terms of just raw skill, and over the past couple of seasons being so productive for their teams. Of course, when it comes to Leon Draisaitl, he showed this season that he's not just a product of McDavid, that he was one of the best players in the NHL, and I do believe that. Defensively, there is some work to be done, but offensively had the best season of any NHL player. Now going on to the third best NHL center in the league and the next #1 center for their team. Going to the Pittsburgh Penguins, I have Sidney Crosby. Now, a lot of people still have him #2 and even #1, and I do respect that quite a bit. But again, for today's video, I'm using a 3-year sample size here, so it doesn't get some of the best years of Sidney Crosby. But even though it isn't the best year, Sidney Crosby is still one of the best players out there. This year, though, I would say especially kind of took a hit for me. He was still well over a point per game, 47 points in 41 games, but I did notice this year that defensively, he was not as strong as he used to be, and I checked with the 3-year sample size analytics-wise, and defensively, Sidney Crosby was just not all that great. Kind of below average at points too. I'm not saying that Sidney Crosby is a below average defensive player, but it's obvious that he's not this amazing overall shutdown guy like he truly used to be. Still solid and the talent is still there, but obviously focusing more on offense in his late career. Next up at #2, I have Nathan MacKinnon from the Colorado Avalanche, and if you've been noticing what I've been talking about with MacKinnon over the past couple of years, it wouldn't become too much of a surprise that I prefer him over Crosby, but it is super close, don't get me wrong. I mean, just this season, 93 points in 69 nice games. To me, he is, between Panarin and him, the MVP, and that's just a guy that over the past couple of seasons has proved to be a dominant offensive player and one of the best in the entire NHL. Next up, coming at #1, my number one NHL center, if you want to put it that way. Going to the Edmonton Oilers, #1/2 center, weirdly, Connor McDavid. And again, we're using a top 3 or a last 3-year sample size here. So McDavid to me is still the best player in the league, even if Leon Draisaitl or MacKinnon has been absolutely amazing recently. McDavid is still the absolute man, and even though Draisaitl is awesome, I think McDavid will continue to be the man. But that'll be it for today's video. Thanks so much for watching, all y'all. If you're watching this point, I absolutely love y'all. Thanks so much for watching. If you guys didn't enjoy this one and haven't already, make sure you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and hit that notification bell for more videos just like this one. Comment down below all your thoughts on my rankings, what you agree and disagree with, and also let me know any players I missed. I'll let you know where I would have them in these rankings too. Of course, with this video, share it, get the word out there, and click on this card for all my 2020 NHL draft content right on playlist. My name is Nathan. I need to run. I love y'all's faces, and I'll see you guys next video or stream. Goodbye.